Huxley series. My name is Jean Melius. I'm on the faculty at Huxley and I'm coordinating the series, and it's my pleasure to introduce Martha Bean, who will be talking about trends in environmental collaboration, practices, and projects. Martha Bean is a senior mediator at Resolve, located in Seattle. She's a seasoned professional with over 25 years of experience mediating complex multi-party natural resources disputes. So with no further ado, thank you, Martha.
Those of us who are in the business of providing services, we write up resumes all the time, and so they go to different people. So they said I need a bio, and I sent the resume. It's like long, but the crux of it is there, and it's long because I've been in this field for 25, 30 years, depending on how you count it. I am an environmental mediator. My degree was in environmental planning here. I graduated in 1978, winter of 1978, and then went on to Berkeley, which had one of the few environmental planning programs at the time, although at the time they called it landscape architecture, because nobody quite knew what to do with environmental planning. Now I don't think you can find a major university anywhere that doesn't have an environmental sciences program, environmental policy, a kind of department that integrates geography, economics, policy, science, education. So Huxley has always been on the cutting edge, and I find that being a part of Huxley, people know us all across the country. People know us. So I'm assuming most of you are Huxley folk. So know that you can bank on that. This is the organization I'm a part of. Actually, just last Friday was my second year anniversary with Resolve. Prior to that, I was 14 years as a sole proprietor doing public policy mediation. Prior to that, I worked with a firm that did it. Prior to that, I worked with CH2M Hill. Anybody know CH2M Hill? Major engineering firm. So that was, and before that, I worked with counties, King and Snohomish counties in their public works department. At the time, I was the only woman. That's another thing that can sort of tell you how things have changed. And the other thing that's notable about Resolve is that it was founded, it was an offshoot of the World Wildlife Fund by a woman named Gail Bingham, who you may have heard of before, who is also a Huxley grad and also a Berkeley grad. I kind of followed her through her schooling, and she's now emeritus. She's no longer our president, but she still lives in DC and does a lot of interesting work. And she was the distinguished alumna a couple of years ago, I think. Maybe when you had your 25-year anniversary, maybe? So anyway, so that's something to know. What I'm actually going to talk about today is bringing science to the negotiating table, because that's a big part of what I do, is I'm involved in science-intensive disputes, or, as you will learn, I'm involved in disputes people think are about science. So we'll talk about that. So adventures in collaboration is what we say here. Now, because Wendy has to leave, my friend Wendy Walker from way back, this was going to be at the end, but I'm going to do it here at the beginning. My family has ties to Bellingham from a long way back. My husband up in the right-hand corner did his geology degrees here and went out to the UW. My son on the left is in Africa with the Peace Corps. He's a Chem grad from here, and one of the many, Western sends more Peace Corps volunteers than any other mid-sized school, yay, and a fair number of them are from Huxley. My daughter there in the middle with her son and two daughters lived in Bellingham for a while. I sort of went to school, we'll just leave it at that. My son down in the bottom there is playing tonight at the Honeymoon. He's part of Hot Dance Scandal, and he's known as Sticky Pete Irving, and the bass player is Andy, who is a Huxley guy. So anyway, that's Bellingham is a sweet place. If we didn't have to live in Seattle, I think we'd live here. And maybe we don't have to live in Seattle, so let's talk about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do, because I think there's a lot to be known about that. One of the things that was true in my profession until about maybe a decade ago is you would always see, and you still see, environmental mediation being on the, let me just draw it here for you. We have an arrow, and we have litigation. Oops. Bad. You know, with the person with the, you know, I'm making a decision and we've gone to court and that's a really bad thing. And way over here is, oh, flowers and sunshine and mediation. And even if it doesn't say bad and good on the spectrum of dispute resolution that you undoubtedly will see in some of your textbooks, this is surely the implication. Going from bad in the courts, arbitration, settlement. Anybody know what arbitration is? Arbitration. Okay, do you want to say it? I'm doing the Socratic thing with one of the professors. So, the difference between being in the law and arbitration.
Arbitration is when there is a neutral party who is not a judge, who hears both sides and comes up with a solution that is mandatory. So it's an out-of-court decision that's still binding on the parties.
Yeah. And there's some variance on it. Sometimes parties can choose, have some outs, but that's generally what it is. So there's arbitration, then there's also, we go all the way then as we get to this end of the wonderful sunshine, flowers spectrum. We go to collaboration, negotiation, collaboration, mediation. Or maybe sometimes people switch it around and put collaboration before mediation because everybody getting together and holding hands and having a decision is the good thing. Well, that's not true. There is no better or worse of any of these. Each decision-making process needs to be matched to the kind of choice that is put before the parties. This is a diagram that I put together with my brother, who happens to be an attorney, and who's particularly incensed by this legal resolutions are bad, collaboration is good distinction. And we've written a paper noting that really the big difference is what the outcome is. Is it an imposed decision, as in the case of going to court, and the judge or judge and jury make a decision, or the arbitrator makes a decision, or is it an agreed to decision? And generally, collaboration, negotiation, mediation tend to be agreed to outcomes. Now, what's interesting is that often, you ever heard the term settle on the courthouse steps? Sure. Most things that supposedly are going to court, they get, I think there's only 5%, I don't know where I got that term, don't ask me for my source, but 95% of that which is people think is going to go to court and be solved there actually gets settled on the courthouse steps because they get far enough along with the issue that they decide, you know what, we'll do better off figuring out how to settle this and agree and have a decision that's agreed amongst us. Also, a big part of what I do, especially in science-intensive disputes, is if we're collaborating along this bottom line here, and we parse out the issues and we see, you know, there's something here that really doesn't belong in a collaborative setting. It's about rights, or it's about, maybe it belongs in an administrative law setting because it's a conflict between the rules that two different agencies are dealing with. In which case, we'll peel that puppy off and say, you know what, that needs an imposed decision by those who have the power to impose the decision. So I want to put to bed the notion right away that mediation good, jury trial bad. Okay. This is a lot of what I think of what I do. I help people who feel like they're falling out of the sky because the issue is so tumultuous, there's so little support, there's so little understanding of what needs to happen with it. Everybody brings their own piece. Some of those folks may have pepperoni, some of them may have tofu, but they've all got to make the pizza pie that is the whole of the agreement. And what's my role in this? Sometimes I'm pushing people out of the plane. Sometimes I'm encouraging people from the side. Sometimes I'm helping them figure out what's on their pizza pie. Sometimes I'm helping them do the work ahead of time to figure out how are we going to form our agreement, how are we going to build our pie, and then of course have it all land. So that's another part of what I do. How many of you are familiar with the notion of zero-sum negotiating? Anybody here? Yeah, a couple here. So let's explain that, because this is another piece that I do. I help people move beyond zero-sum negotiating. Now this, if we go back to the thing I mentioned earlier, this is actually something that's, you don't have the option of moving beyond zero-sum negotiation if you are doing a rights-based decision, if you're doing a legal decision. It's this or that. You don't generally get to choose something different. So we have, and it's like, this is how much I want what I want. This is my interest, and this is your interest. I mean, it's $100. I want 100, in which case you get 0. You want 100, in which case I get 0, and the zero sum is 50, right? So it's a linear relationship. One interest versus another interest, if we define it that way. So here's what happens with that. You waste a lot of energy figuring out how are we going to do this. Especially if it's more complex, but people think it's a zero-sum game. I get this or you get that. So what we do is in our kind of work, we can figure out how to bring other things come to play so that the area behind that curve gets pushed out. You use different resources to bring other things to play. This is deal making. That's it in a nutshell. It's a deal making. It's not just about $100 and 0 or $100 and 0, 50-50. It's saying, I'll take 45 if you also give me those 3 free tickets you have to the movie, right? I'll take 30 if you also help me with my Huxley chemistry homework for the next 3 quarters. So, okay, so it's deal making. Now, the other thing I want to note here is that somehow the notion of deal making has also become a nasty thing to say. That somehow if you're working things out mano a mano, if you're figuring out how to make the whole picture, what's most important to you work by peeling off other things or adding other things, that somehow that's a bad thing. It's not. That's keeping your eye on the prize and knowing where you're going and bringing other things to play in order to make it happen. I just bring this up because this is another thing that I do that's actually particular in my work. I find that when people are talking through things, they often use imagery. They say, oh, this is a long road to hoe, or they'll say, oh, this ship's going the wrong direction, which is actually the one that metaphor that was used for this. Or they'll say, we had one fellow say, you know, this group of people, we are acting like a bunch of orangutans. I did say it right, orangutans, right? It's a tan. So I will often take that imagery and draw a picture for them. This is a picture of their image, of what their issues were. I also do pictures of what they want to do with the process, or I'll do pictures of their desired outcome. So that's something that happens. Just so you'll know, this one was an issue about GMO. It was actually in the 90s, so it's been something we've been talking about for a while. There were the parties at the table said that they were, who by the way were convened by the foundations that are represented by the top there. They're looking down, saying we paid all this money to have this collaborative system happen. We're watching it. We're going to see what happens. And the party said, you know, we all have the same goal, good, healthy people, good, healthy food for people. That's the prow of the ship. But it's hard to do it because there's 3 different regulatory agencies. There's EPA, there's USDA, and there's FDA, all steering the ship in a different direction. There's lots of different wind gusts that change which way this is moving. And then there are all these upwellings of issues and controversies underneath us. And all of these things are anchoring us, but we're not exactly sure what the primary anchor is. So that's another thing that I do. But today, we're going to talk about some aspects of this paper that I wrote a while back with a woman who has worked with Resolve forever, and who I really enjoy, about paper itself was written for mediators about bringing science to the table, but I think there's some things that we can learn here too. I'm going to go through this really quite quickly and focus on some of the examples from cases that I've worked on, and then I'd like to leave a good bit of time for questions, because I find that we often learn the most from each other in Q&A sessions. So let's move right along. These are the questions that we have to ask when science comes to the negotiating table. And that we were asking when we wrote this paper, what role does it play in conflicts? Do these differences actually cause the conflict or just affect it? When is scientific information core to the resolution, and how do we know that? How do we frame scientific disputes differently according to our interests? What's the role for dispute resolution professionals? What tools can we use? How forcefully should we enforce using standard tools? And what's the responsibility of the practitioner to those at the table to understand the science? Lastly, how do we manage it? How can science bring the information to the table in a way that assists in making decisions? How do you determine when more or better information is necessary to move forward? What information has the most relevance? Is there a difference on how science must be integrated if this dispute is upstream or downstream? Upstream disputes are those which occur before, where people anticipate there might be a conflict down the road. A downstream dispute is when there actually is a conflict that needs resolving. I'm going to take a step back here and note that I'm using the word conflict, but in my work I'm moving away from that. Because, again, just like this, conflict implies bad. I like to normalize the notion of conflict. There is no reason whatsoever. We would actually be living in a pretty boring world if things didn't butt up against each other periodically. And it's through that butting up against each other that we find something new to do. We find an opportunity. So, and also I find with the people I work with, they tend to not like to be told they're in conflict, especially not in the Northwest. In the Northwest, we don't like to be in conflict. So we talk about the energy that you have, the passion that you have around some issue, and how, if you want to, and you may not want to, you take that passion and energy with somebody who has a different approach and turn it into a different solution. There are a lot of obstacles for discussing science. I'm not going to go through those because I think I would like to focus on some of the case examples, and we can go back to those if you want. One of the ways to, I'm going to change my way. I'm going to go back to the obstacles and just run through them, and then we'll talk about a few of them here with some case examples. Poor issue framing, that means somebody sets it up in a way that isn't helpful for the conversation. Pseudo-professional posturing, shifting conceptual framework, we're going to talk about that one. Unrealistic expectations of science and scientists, I'm going to talk about that one too for just a minute in a moment. Outdated data and organizational lag, how long does it take to actually get the data out? Less of an issue now than it was 10 years ago because of the internet. Differing tolerances for complexity among those who are sitting at the table. Pseudo-scientific environmental conflicts, again, things that are posed as environmental conflicts which really are not. Multiple disciplines having different lenses on the issue. Access to data, that's a power thing. Access to data is a power thing. Adequacy of existing data, unclear significance of the data. Restricted data, some people have it, other people don't. Politicized information, lack of expertise, so people can't really understand it, and inconclusive data. I'm going to start right here with unrealistic expectations of science and scientists. How many of you are aware of the fact that in Italy last year, 3 or 4 seismologists were convicted of not predicting an earthquake properly? Convicted. Yes? Did you have something you know about that? Yeah. And
Yes, I think that's become a little bit of a meme. The conviction was actually over improper risk communication.
that's right. And that actually was there was a good article about that just this week in New Scientist, that it was about improper risk communication. And that's true, but it's more fun to say, oh, they're convicted. So thank you for
But it paints scientists as, or it paints Italian courts as being totally right, or maybe they're only a little right.
But we could take that and ask the question, is it a scientist's job to be the best risk communication professional possible? I dare say most scientists I know got into scientists precisely because they did not want to communicate with other people. Right? And also, the other thing I would maintain about science, I think that's changing now actually, which I think is for the better. I think it's much for the better. Not only are scientists having teams of folks, but scientists are getting training in that, and also, frankly, science is no longer seen as, it's an iterative thing, it's no longer, I think, seen as the thing that you do if you're the kind of person who cleans yourself. There's even TV shows about it, kind of being a clean scientist. I also would volunteer, being married to a scientist, that people who are scientists, their heart and soul is in their science. It is part of their identity. The gross generalization here.
Jeffrey Edwards.
Hi, Jeffrey Edwards. Or maybe Jeffrey Edwards is gone. Anyway, that's all right. And often, it's so much a part of a scientist's identity, their science, that one of the things I find myself working with is the emotion in the science. If you start asking a scientist, can you tell me more about your assumptions? Can we think about, you presented something that feels like a black box to the people who are learning about it. Let's see if we can open up that black box and pull it back a little bit. Oh, where did you get that from? How did that come to be? And often you get all the way back and somebody will say, well, this is how we've always done it. Or said more nicely, this is the standard of practice. Or this is the way the theory has always worked. And it can be very threatening to people whose life has been in science and who believe they are illuminating truth, to be asked to say a little bit more about where their science comes from. I'm going to show you, let's see here. Let's see. Does this have sound? Anybody know? We didn't check that out. Yeah. Okay. One of the challenges that I have had is helping scientists explain things to people. And a couple of years ago, I'm working on the Lower Duwamish Superfund site. It's been around forever. Actually, it's not, but it's been, other things have been around forever, like the Duwamish people who now can't have their subsistence fishing because of the Superfund site. But at any rate, it's been in process to get cleaned up for a long time. In fact, the proposed plan is right now just down on the street as of a week ago. A couple of years ago, as EPA and was beginning to think through what were some options for figuring out what to do with, what are some ways we could do the cleanup, basically. We were trying to think of some alternate ways to get this information across because it's highly complex and it's, it's kind of boring, even though it has, it makes a difference in people's lives, what's going to happen. So what I decided to do with my colleagues is we had really not very good luck, especially with actually the people who looked at environmental health risks, the risk communicators, and helping them think about how to communicate this to others. So we did this, and I'm going to show it to you, and then, let's see. And then I'll tell you about one of the aha moments from this. Well, yeah, that's the wrong one. It is video, right? Well, I'm assuming that that is the, okay, excuse me one more time. If I can't do it this next time, we will just skip it. Okay, now it's taking too long to load. Is that a common thing with this machine? Anybody know? Try. Oh. Well, I'll just have to tell you about it. You'll have to go play around with it if you're interested. I'm very sorry I'm not at the right spot. What we did was this. We used Lego to build the alternatives. And we made packages of Lego that were at round tables, where at each table we had a Spanish speaker, because the community has a lot of Spanish-speaking individuals. By virtue of doing that, the big bridge that occurred was, yes, with the people in the community, but also with the scientists who had invitation to speak, and to speak in a way that worked for them, because all of those scientists had grown up playing with Legos, every one of them. And by using a medium that was comfortable to them, focusing on their comfort and their culture, if you will, they were able to communicate very effectively about the 4 or 5 different options for, physical options for cleaning up the Superfund site. The other thing that was neat is a couple of the folks actually turned out to be fluent Spanish speakers, but had not revealed that because it didn't feel right for them they didn't feel comfortable using that facility of theirs in a meeting setting. So the risk, the communication that occurred, are you finding it? Are you able to?
It came up on mine, yeah.
It didn't?
So you might try again.
Okay. Well, I think you'll enjoy seeing this, so I am going to try again. And was it this site that you were, was it this particular one?
So I just searched for that move here.
Ah, okay, well, let's do it that way.
If I can help. You just type YouTube serious play in Google and type YouTube.
To the side.
There you go.
There we go.
Here's one picture.
Okay.
That one that was the picture. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Let me make sure your sound sounds good.
Demonstrate used and intuitive and ultimately easy. Hello, I'm Martha Bean. I'm a senior mediator with Resolve. We're going to demonstrate for you how we used an intuitive and ultimately very sophisticated technique using building tours to help engineers and scientists speak accurately, respectfully, and effectively with the community about contamination in their neighborhood. And have some fun, too. Okay, the basics. Each color represents an important component of the whole cleanup picture. Sand and gravel brought in from the outside is beige. Mud and sediment already there is gray. And of course, course pollution is red. One method for addressing pollution on the river bottom is to simply let the river bring in and deposit sediment as it always does. This natural process can, in some instances, work just fine to hold the contamination in place. And here's another, enhanced natural recovery. The river naturally deposits sediment, but it's given a head start by putting a clean layer of sand and gravel down first. This helps keep the contamination securely covered. Sometimes plants are also used to help hold the sand, gravel, mud, and sediment in place. While simple and relatively inexpensive, natural recovery and enhanced natural recovery aren't perfect. Ship propellers can churn up the bottom, exposing the pollution. Careful design and placement can, in most instances, prevent this. A third method is called capping, and it's not too different from enhanced natural recovery, but the layer of sand and gravel that's added is thicker. Sometimes a sort of glue is added to help hold it all in place. There's one more method we demonstrated using building toys. This cleanup technique is called removal, or more simply, just dredging. It's intense and it's expensive, but it's just right for some parts of the river, especially where the pollution is particularly bad. Contaminated mud is very carefully pulled all the way out of the river. Sand and gravel are added. This gets at most, though not absolutely all, of the contamination. Sedimentation can occur on top, as before in the other methods we saw. All that contaminated mud has to go somewhere, so it is trucked, or barged, or taken by train to a special landfill. And all that truck, barge, and train traffic can have impact too. In summary, we were able to show, playing with building toys really, 3 basic options for cleanup: dredging and taking the stuff away, letting the river lay down sediment on its own, and capping. And that's the end. That's how we did it. How we got engineers and people of really all ages in a couple of different languages, engaging with each other, working together on some complicated concepts, and doing a lot of two-way learning, and having a pretty good time of it too. Many thanks to all those who helped.
Okay, so one of the things that, wrong one, when you got 2 of these going, it's hard to tell which one is what sometimes. The other thing that was neat about this was, for the Spanish-speaking community, a lot of times the kids were the ones who knew English and the parents were not. And it is a really difficult dynamic when the kids are the ones who have to explain technical things to their parents. One of the things that was cool about using the Legos, and like I said, that's a conceptual video of what we did, but we were basically playing at tables with them and demonstrating with them, is that because it was toys, the parents retained the parent-child relationship. And the kids were playing with toys, as opposed to just telling mom and dad what was up. So it helped with family and cultural dynamics as well. So I'm going to go to this. One of the, oh, we didn't talk about the obstacles. Do I have time? I do. So we're going to go to the obstacle that I'm calling unclear significance. And let me find the notes about this. And what I'd like you to do is think about, I'm going to describe the conundrum and think about what it is about the science that is the conundrum, and then what we might do about it. First of all, I suspect many of you are involved in at least learning about salmon recovery, because salmon is one of our iconic endangered species here in the Northwest. And there is a whole framework of law and regulation around what you do once a species like salmon, Chinook salmon, spring Chinook salmon in this case, are considered endangered. And one of the things you do is you have to figure out how you're going to recover them, which means paying attention to what? What would you need to pay attention to if you wanted to recover salmon? Some of you probably had this in class. Just popcorn it out there for me. What do you have to do? You have to pay attention to habitat, water quality, fishing, natural predators, genetics, that's a big one. So one of the things we know a lot about, let's take just a piece of this habitat. We're learning a lot about habitat on land, if you will, or up in the tributaries. We're learning a lot about the impact of hatcheries on what we call wild fish, which then gets you into a whole discussion of genetics. We're learning a lot about water quality impacts on salmon. And a lot of decisions need to be made based on all those things. One thing we know very little about is what happens with salmon when they're in the ocean. What happens when they're in that ocean habitat? And so we can have a lot of information about all of these other pieces, but there are many scientists who think that actually what happens in the ocean just wipes all the rest of this stuff out. That the biggest variation in what happens to salmon isn't about water quality from runoff, isn't about genetic stuff, it isn't or mixing up of wild and hatchery salmon. It isn't about how much gravel there is available for the salmon to make their little nests in when they make when they lay their eggs. It's about what happens in the ocean. So it's unclear how significant all that other stuff is. So that's the scientific dilemma. What's the policy dilemma there? Anybody want to take a stab at it? Should it matter that we don't know as much about what's going on in the ocean? What's the policy dilemma?
It's harder to identify the problem.
It's harder to identify the problem, right. Anything else?
Jurisdiction.
Jurisdictions. Who's got jurisdiction? Over the ocean? Oh, lots of people. Jurisdictions and issues, so that's a policy issue. What if you are charged with, what if you're the owner of a dam and you've got to do something because the law says you have to recover salmon? What would you do about this scientific conundrum? Imagine when I say a dam owner, it might actually be you, because many dams in this part of the world are owned by the people they serve. What would you do? What would you do about the science question relative to the policy dilemma? Any ideas?
You might just work with what you have and say, that's the best we can do.
And that is actually what most people do. And then what happens is the regulatory agency comes in and says, well, and this is what we think you ought to do because this is what we think we know about what you can do. So this is how you have to recover. So other people have taken the strategy of saying, well, let's fund research in the oceans. But that adds a whole other set of uncertainty to it, right? So one of the points I'd like to make here about this is that a lot of things that present themselves as science disputes are not science disputes. The particular situation I was just describing to you is one where the issue is, what do we know? What does the law say we have to do with what we know? And what values do we bring to the table in order to make those choices? And I dare say that here in the Pacific Northwest, in part because the Department of Commerce, NOAA, Department of the Division of Fisheries says, thou shalt care about these things. We have a value that we're going to do everything we can with what we know about to change those things so that we can recover them. Maybe not everything, because you haven't seen many dams come down in the US, right? Okay, let's quickly go to another, and then we'll have just a few minutes for questions. One of my favorites right now is shifting conceptual frameworks about science, and the big poster child for that is climate change, right? The big poster child. Because when we first started hearing about this, I actually heard about it in Huxley in 1978. So I just want you to know, Huxley, once again, has been on top of things from the start. We thought about it as global warming, or actually before it was just emissions problems, and it was primarily couched as a problem with what happens to your lungs and a health quality issue. Then we started talking about global warming. And what's wrong with the term global warming? I know you know this. What's wrong with the term global warming? Yes?
It sounds like a positive thing.
Oh, sure, yeah, we're all going to be at the beach. Yeah, Mai Tais, and yeah, you're right. Also, it's too simple. And not every place gets warm under global warming. So then we moved to this thing called climate change. Climate change. And that's a little more accurate, right? But what's wrong with the concept of climate change? Anybody have or maybe wrong is too strong a word. Yes?
It doesn't sound severe enough.
May not sound severe enough. Yeah, well, the climate's changing. Well, it did that before. We had the mini ice age, and and if you look at those graphs, it's not really a problem what people are doing. What else might be wrong with it? Yes?
General confusion between weather and climate, where a really hot summer in the Midwest and a super drought, and everyone thinks, oh, climate change is happening.
Perfect. A difference between climate and weather, and which is about the period we're looking at, right? One of the happiest things that I've read about recently is the move to a term called "we're getting more energetic weather." Have you heard about that? And this is actually a variation on climate change. One of the outcomes of climate change is that there's more energy in our atmosphere. We're getting more energetic weather. We're going to have more storms. We're going to have more typhoons. We're going to have more monsoons. We're going to have more. Some places are going to get a whole bunch more snow. More severe weather. There's more energy in the atmosphere. We're going to have more severe weather. So that is a conceptual shift in how we've been thinking about the impact of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, with that, I'm going to stop and invite you back to the honeymoon tonight at 8:30 to see my son play. And if you have any questions, I'd be so happy to answer them. Yes?
Do you hear the term global weirding?
Yes, I love that. I've seen that on a couple of bumper stickers. Global weirding, I think that's pretty illustrative. Yeah. Other questions? Questions about what a mediator does or how we bring science to the table? I have like 5 other examples, but we didn't get to them. Yes?
Thanks. How do you get to be in a position to mediate? Like, who comes to you? Because usually they take it to litigation, right? So where do they say, we just not would mediate this?
Usually, actually, they don't do anything. Usually, it's easier to just plod along with the conflict, or again, with the lack of resolution or the lack of clear direction, because that's easier. There's a lot of inertia here. If it's a really hot issue, it goes to court. And frankly, I really love mediating things that the court has bounced back, where the court will say, this is a pretty technical thing. I don't think you want some judge who got a degree in political science making this decision. I'm going to ask you to go back and get mediation. I love those because then the judge says, thou shalt. And it means I got a deadline. I love that. Often people will see that they need to be advocating for their own interests. Right now I'm mediating an agreement between NOAA Department of Fisheries, NOAA Division of Fisheries, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the BLM on how they're going to go about having the conversation, to something, setting the table like at the UN or something, on doing the science around endangered species on BLM forest lands in Western Oregon. And they all really need to advocate for for the rules and the laws that they bring to that discussion. And they want to work hard on that. They really want to bring their passion and their experience to that. And they want someone else to manage that discussion. So that's how I get a lot of my work. Resolve is doing a lot of cool things with free, prior, and informed consent, if you're interested, if you know about that. A lot of work with supply chain management, a lot of work with certification. And my colleagues at Resolve have foundations and private industry professionals and environmental groups. We work a lot with the Natural Resources Defense Fund. We work a lot with Greenpeace, who will call together, will ask Resolve to convene people to address a particular problem. Extractive, right now we're working a lot with conflict minerals. So that's another way we work, is by having people express an interest and then we convene on their behalf. Yes?
How long does this usually take? Like, how long is the process? Because sometimes, you're butting heads and some people don't want to give.
One of the things that's interesting is a change in our field is we used to say there was an end point, but as I mentioned at the beginning, often there is no end point. And often we build into systems so that when people butt up against something else, they can come back to the table. So that's not really a good answer to your problem or your question. It can take anywhere from 2 days to 10 years. Ambassador Mitchell, the one who negotiated the Irish peace accords many years ago, he said people asked him for years, so are you there yet? Are you there yet? Are you done? And he said, I'll be done. We'll be successful when it's done. So it really depends. I had an agreement last year where we were on the verge, and it wasn't until a real stick and then retired that we were able to get agreement. So now I don't write that in a case example, but that's really true. I mean, a lot of this is about personality.